The PSVR2 was one of my favorite devices of 2023, but at the same time, it seemed like the company that created it also wrote its obituary the very same day. So, was this device doomed from the start, or is it just getting started? VR gaming is one of those niches that I had always wanted to get into, but never really had the means to. I didn't have a top-of-the-line PC, or really any PC until recently, and the original PSVR came out at a time when I wasn't making a ton of money. So the games always interested me, like seeing Beat Saber videos was awesome, or VR chat videos that were hilarious. And I remember seeing the announcement for Arkham VR, but it all looked really novel to me. But when Sony's PSVR2 was announced, I was immediately interested. For one, it had the power of the PS5 behind it, so no PC needed. It was also extremely simple to set up as compared to the original PSVR, which, let's just say, wasn't. It featured inside-out hand tracking for more precise movements, an OLED display baked in, and it was light. And while the price at $550 was more than the Meta Quest 2, which was the de facto entry option at the time, it also seemed like a superior package. So I decided to take the plunge and bought one at launch. And now 1 year later, do I regret that purchase? Well, let's talk about it. So starting off, let's talk hardware. I haven't used too many other headsets, but I will say the build quality is premium and I've had zero issues with it. I've dropped these controllers a time or two and they still look immaculate. I also haven't had any issues with the headset. It sits on the head comfortably and goes on and off extremely easy. The software Sony uses to correct your visibility using eye tracking does a great job, and when you're in the game, you really do fade away. It should be noted, headsets are going to feel different for everyone, and you specifically might not enjoy this one. But after you understand where the headset should sit, it personally has been a breeze putting it on and taking it off. The way the headset sits on your head can also make it extremely easy for me to throw on my Arctis 7 wireless headset, and it creates zero discomfort having it on, save for getting a little hot if I wear it during some more intense game sessions. The single USB-C port is great, however the console only having a single USB-C port is a drawback. For instance, if you were connecting your wireless headset's dongle through that port, it will lead to you having to find an alternate adapter to help solve that issue. But being able to grab my headset, plug in a single cord, throw it on, and start gaming is extremely fast and simple. And I think that is important in getting a VR gaming session going. If setup takes too long and you really don't have a ton of time to play, you might end up foregoing playing at all if you know there's a long setup process. The PSVR2 is extremely simple to get on and off and get playing, and that will always be appreciated. A lot of people would cite the headset not being wireless as a drawback, but in my opinion, it's a great middle ground between a fully wireless headset like the Meta Quest line and the original PSVR, which had a lot of different cables. Also, the headset being wired means that Sony didn't have to increase the weight of the device with things like a battery or processing units. The controllers themselves fit comfortably in the hand, and the button placement feels natural, especially the grip button on the interior and the adaptive triggers that were brought over from the DualSense. Battery life is similar to the DualSense, and that I would gauge you get a good 5 to 8 hours out of each controller. The buttons also do have some capacitive ability, so you can place your fingers on certain parts of the controller to register touch without actually pressing the button. I rarely play VR for longer than a couple hours at a time, so as long as I make sure to charge the controllers after I use them, they won't die on me. The display, or displays because there's one for each eye, are a resolution of 2000 by 2040 per eye with a refresh rate that varies between 90 and 120 Hz. They offer a 110 degree field of view, which isn't the best in the industry, but it's serviceable and far from the worst. These are OLED panels, and I must say the colors do pop and the blacks are deep. However, when the screen is darker is when you're able to see most of the screen door effect a lot of headsets have. The inside of the headset also features eye tracking, which works exceptionally well. You calibrate it when you put the headset on, and it's kind of shocking how well it works. It's utilized in certain games, but the eye tracking actually provides a much more integral feature to the headset: foveated rendering. By understanding where you are looking at, Sony is able to allow the PS5 and games on the PSVR2 to change the resolution of an image in real time for wherever you're looking at. That means that the resolution will be the highest on objects you are looking at, while the image in your peripherals will be taken down to a lower resolution. This allows for games to be less demanding on the hardware and keeps frame rates high, which is integral to combat motion sickness in the VR space. There's a lot of technical stuff that goes into it. Just know that it means your image will be sharp and your performance will be good. Rounding out the hardware, there are 4 cameras on the outside of the headset that provide inside-out tracking and some extremely light mixed reality integration. When booting your headset up for the first time, time, or anytime you move to a new area, or anytime the light is even slightly different in your room, you will be prompted to set up your play area. The headset does its best to map out the space you're in and set its own boundaries. Then it allows you to add or subtract those boundaries. Your standard box will be good for the majority of titles as well as sitting, but if you're playing a title that requires something called room scale, aka a game where you have to move in a large area akin to something like Job Simulator, your play area will need to be 6 foot 7 inches by 6 foot 7 inches. That's about as much mixed reality you will get on this device, a far cry from the experiences on the Apple Vision Pro or Meta Quest 3. As I already stated, the 4 cameras also provide inside-out tracking, which has its pros and cons on this headset specifically. Inside-out tracking is when the headset cameras themselves identify the controllers, or on certain headsets even just your hands and fingers, and track where they are moving in this space. This all works extremely well, as long as your controllers are in the vicinity of the cameras. The PSVR itself used the PlayStation Move controllers, which meant that the PlayStation camera attached to the PS4, or I guess the PS5 if you have it, and an extra adapter, would find the glowing balls on your Move controllers or your DualShock 4 and follow it around. This allowed for certain benefits and certain drawbacks. However, the inside-out tracking is generally much better. For one, it doesn't require you to be in front of a camera the whole time because the headset has the cameras on it. Where this turns into a hit in the loss column is on 2 fronts. For one, if you're doing anything away from the cameras, it can cause the system to glitch out sometimes. There are certain games that require you to sling a weapon or draw a weapon from your back, and the second your controller leaves the threshold of the camera, it's anyone's guess on if it's going to correctly perform the desired action or not. The other issue comes up that if you were a PSVR user, your games are no longer compatible with the PSVR2. Popular titles like Astrobot Rescue Mission were built around the Move controllers. Therefore, porting them is almost impossible, at least not without any heavy retooling. Some titles did develop a PSVR2 version of their games, and it was up to the developer whether or not to charge. But some titles will never get the update, and that's unfortunate to hear. There's also an included set of headphones, which are serviceable and convenient due to them being attached to the headset with integrated storage, and they have come in handy when I don't feel like pulling out my wireless headset, or I know I'm going to be doing something more active and I don't want to sweat with the headset on. There's also a built-in mic that works well. So, it all sounds pretty good, right? A VR headset with 4K resolution and the power of the PS5 behind it. Great hardware can only take you so far, especially if you don't have good software behind it. And Sony has wasted the PSVR2. Don't get me wrong, this thing has some of the heavy hitters, right? Your Beat Sabers, your Moss Books, and it even has some Sony first-party titles like Horizon Call of the Mountain or Gran Turismo 7 compatibility, but that's where the buck really ends. Save for Firewall Ultra, which I guess could be classified as a second-party title, which I don't know how that worked out for them. Everything else is third-party. Now, I'm sure that certain titles, like the Dark Pictures Anthology Switchback VR or the Resident Evil 4 Remake's free VR mode, were funded by Sony, and they're excellent in their own right. But that still pales in comparison of what Sony could have done and should be doing. Sony isn't leading the market in features with this headset, and they, unlike some of their VR competitors, position this device solely as a gaming device. And if anyone is built to make the best exclusive game experience for VR, you would think that would be Sony. Obviously, I understand there's more nuance to it than that. Developing for VR is a different beast than a traditional title, but Horizon Call of the Mountain is evidence that some of the heavy-hitting Sony titles can translate into a good and unique VR experience. Imagine wielding Kratos' Leviathan axe or Blades of Chaos in VR, or wielding some of Rash's crazy weapons, or sneaking up behind a clicker and using a shiv on them. These experiences, if done correctly, would push hardware in a way that Meta and other competitors could not match. We have seen them try though, with exclusive titles from large IPs such as the Assassin's Creed VR game. But if Sony was consistently putting out amazing AAA level VR experiences, I think it could lead to them being very competitive in the VR space. However, with the recent announcement of layoffs all around the company, including laying off the director of Horizon Call of the Mountain, something tells me it's probably not very high on their priority list. They have allowed use of the PSVR2 with a PC though, but you have to buy an expensive adapter to be able to even use that feature. So far, the cost of entry, while not as high as some devices on the market, is still pretty high. And that's because as of writing, the device is still being sold by Sony at $549.99, which is more than the cost of the most expensive PlayStation 5, which is also required to use this device. Now, it should be noted that on sites like GameStop, you can get it at a much more reasonable $399.99, which I would say makes it a more attractive option to people who are put off by the price tag. So let's move on from the titles that we don't have and start looking at some of the ones that we do. I personally bought the Horizon Call of the Mountain bundle when I pre-ordered my headset a year ago, but I knew that as a newbie to VR, there were some other titles I really wanted to try. And color me surprised when I went to the PlayStation Store and realized how much cheaper VR titles are than traditional ones. Which, thinking on it, it makes sense. The games are naturally a bit more limited than traditional titles, and getting people to fork over $70 for a VR game might seem a bit steep. But still, I was pleasantly surprised when most titles could be obtained for $30 or less. So let me just run through some of my favorites that I've tried and played on the PSVR2 and what I really like about them, and maybe a few things they could do better. Starting off with Horizon Call of the Mountain, which I suppose would be the flagship VR title for PSVR2. The game is honestly very impressive. I like how they made it both accessible for fans of the series and newcomers alike. They definitely knew the hardware they were working with and its limitations and strengths. Eye tracking plays a prominent role here, and you can feel it working when you have to focus your eyes onto a certain point of an enemy or a faraway target to be able to hit it with your arrows. The vistas are beautiful, but climbing might be a deal breaker for some people. I personally really enjoyed the traversal and how you receive different gadgets as the story progressed to change things up. Combat is also a treat every time, but it's very much an arena style, which might suit your tastes or it might not. Overall, a good experience in my opinion. Next up, we have Gran Turismo 7, which is the game that really shows what VR should be on the PSVR2 and PS5. GT7 allows you to play the full game in VR mode by putting you directly in the driver's seat for all of your favorite cars. When you look around, you see the entire cabin of the vehicle, fully decked out and as realistic as possible. In their showcase mode, you can look at every angle of every car in the entire game. The reason I say this game embodies what VR should be on the PS5 is instead of GT7 being a VR racing game, GT7 is a full racing game with a free VR mode. So you can really choose how you want to play. If you're in the mood to strap on a VR headset and play, cool. If you're not, that's fine too. You can play the game how you want to. A couple of other games we will get to in this list do this, but I really hope that Sony brings this type of thing to other games. It adds value to your purchase and is like an added bonus for owning a PSVR2 system. Now, to my favorite game to play with friends on the PSVR2, Walkabout Mini Golf. And I know what you might be thinking. It's just mini golf, right? But you'd be mistaken. The developers of this game really understand VR. Every course has 18 holes and 18 hidden golf balls, one per hole. Not only this, but if you hit under par or find all of the golf balls on a course, you unlock the hard mode of that course, which brings a new set of challenges to unlock a brand new putter. All of this wouldn't matter if the mini golf itself wasn't good though, and thankfully it is. The physics are tight and all of the courses are unique and memorable. And if you have friends to play with, the game gets even better, allowing you to really feel like you and a buddy are meeting up on the green for a few holes. Also, the developer drops new courses often for extremely cheap prices, and the game never gets stale. I could not recommend it more. When I first got VR, I really wanted to try Beat Saber, and eventually I did. But it didn't come to PSVR2 at launch, so I got recommended our next game to hold me over. Pistol Whip. If you haven't tried this game, think of something like Beat Saber, but with guns. Played like an on-rail shooter, you get to live out your John Wick fantasy by shooting hundreds of enemies with bonus points if you can stay on beat. With a ton of different levels to go through, a lot of weapon variety and customization, and consistent updates by the developer, free updates I might add, this game is a must-have in your collection. Eventually though, I did get my hands on Beat Saber, and I'm glad that I did. I won't beat this one into the ground because it's a VR staple at this point, but think Guitar Hero with lightsabers. Blocks float towards you in a stationary position, with different directional arrows on them. Slice the arrow in the direction it's pointing, complete the song. There are a lot of songs this game gives you to begin with, and you can buy more music packs for artists you might already like for what seems like a reasonable price, but might not be for you specifically. Capcom seems to have been the most supported developer when it comes to the PSVR2. They had a fully playable VR mode for Resident Evil Village ready to go at launch for the system, at no extra cost might I add, and then they turned around and did it again for the Resident Evil 4 remake. Now to be fair, there was already an existing VR version of RE4, but the remake VR version looks as incredible as the remake itself. The combat, menus, and overall feel to the game are fantastic, and it makes a second playthrough a blast, and again, completely free. It is fun to see them adapt this game to VR because playing it in first person as compared to the usual third person does make it feel very different. And like I pointed out with GT7, this adds a ton of value to the game you already own. Synapse is a fun game that fulfills a power fantasy and scratches your roguelike itch. Blending telekinetic powers with solid gunplay, you see how deep into the mind you can really get, and with some top-notch voice acting, I have enjoyed the time I've spent with it. Pavlov is the last game I'll touch on today, and that game is about as good of a shooter as you can ask for. The sheer amount of different weapons in that game are more than impressive, and even more so, they all function exactly how that weapon should in real life. From how you load the magazine to how you chamber around, it's all extremely impressive. This game is cross-platform as well, so you get to see how you stack up with VR users on different headsets. A lot of cool things in this one, like holding your hand to your ear if you're talking on a walkie, to violently hard and fun zombie modes. There are a ton more VR games out there, some I own and some I don't. If you have a favorite we missed, please leave it down in the comment section so I know to check it out. Before we wrap up, I do have an additional gripe to touch on. Sony currently only offers one game for PSVR2 in its PS Plus Extra tier, and that's Humanity, which I haven't tried yet to say how it even is. But I think that's a big indicator of how Sony really feels about the PSVR2 system in general. They treat it like an afterthought, and it's becoming one. So, in closing, the PSVR2 after 1 year is a mixed bag. It's an excellent device for me, and I'm lucky enough to have a close friend who also owns one, and that has increased its value to me tenfold. VR is very gimmicky to some people, and those type of people would be wasting their money on this device. However, if you are interested in VR and you have a PS5 and you can get one at a good price, I would say you won't be disappointed. Bloomberg has reported that Sony has halted the manufacturing of the device, and that would generally point to low sales, and that supply is outweighing demand, which is a bummer, but it seems like Sony are trending towards giving up in this space. We'll see where we're at a year from now. I want to be hopeful that Sony will help this device live up to its full potential, but sadly I think the PSVR2 might have been dead on arrival. I don't know if Sony has it in at this point to try and revive it. Please let us know how you feel about the PSVR2 if you own one, or why you would choose to get one, or why you opted not to get one. Also, please let us know some of your favorite games or games that might have left you disappointed. We look forward to hearing from you. And as always, stay authentic. Thanks.